My name is Jamie. I'm 23 years old. Well, my husband and I have been living in our apartment for 3 years now. We have 3 little girls. They are Mary, who is 4, Sally, who is 3, and May, who is 6 months old. Many strange things have been occurring in our apartment since I was pregnant with my baby May. The first thing is that my older daughters Mary and Sally had to sleep in the same crib because my oldest Mary broke hers. Well, one night, me and my husband were sleeping, and I woke up suddenly and looked over to my daughter's crib, and I saw someone standing up at the edge of the crib, looking at us. At first I thought it was my oldest daughter Mary, because whatever it was seemed to have the same tall, skinny features as my daughter. I got up to get her to lie back down, but when I did get up, I looked in the crib, and both my babies were covered and fast asleep. The second incident was again in the middle of the night. My youngest daughter May was 2 months old, and I had gone to bed early. My husband stayed up late watching TV in the living room and didn't want to wake any of us up, so we slept on the couch. Well, at this point, we had just brought my daughter Mary her toddler bed, and Sally still slept in her crib. Well, I'd suddenly awoke, and I saw what at the time was my daughter Mary get off her bed and went over to Sally's crib and was looking in there. I got up and was going to get mad at her because I didn't want her to wake Sally up. When I got to her bed, I saw that she was covered and fast asleep. It freaked me out. My husband didn't believe me. Then we were standing by our breakfast bar at 10 p.m. talking, and he stopped what he was saying and went to the bathroom. He came back pale and said, "You're not going to believe it." He said he thought he saw Mary go into the bathroom and went in there, and no one was there. He said he was going to get mad at her because she was supposed to be asleep. And when he went in there, Mary was fast asleep. He said, "I swear I saw a little girl go into the bathroom. Whatever it seems to be attracted to Mary, because all the times that we have seen this thing, it always is around her. We have even mistaken it for our daughter. The weirdest part is that my brother-in-law came along to bring my nephews over to play with my daughters, and I was taking pictures of all of them. On one of the pictures, there was an orb, and I took a picture a second before that, and there was nothing there. All in all, whatever it is seriously freaking me out." Throughout most of my life, I think I've always been able to see things, even if I wasn't completely aware of what I was seeing. I have many experiences, good and bad, but I'll only share a few. The first happened when I was 9, and my father was incarcerated. I remember coming home from school, and my mom was on the phone, so my other brother, 14 years my senior, brought me into the living room to watch television. As I sat there, something in my head kept saying, "Your father is in jail, but you'll be okay." The voice kept repeating this, and I kept thinking, yeah, right. My father was a minister, and therefore, I never had any reason to believe anything was abnormal. My mother came and sat beside me on the couch and told me what had happened to my father. Until this day, I think I was a guardian, just trying to prepare me for the bad news. The second happened after my grandmother passed away. I was 17, and she was the first person that I've ever lost that I was very close to. My family is very superstitious, and although I didn't believe in a lot of it, I've started to believe in some. My grandmother who passed had a cousin, who I also consider a grandmother, and she always used to warn me to be careful in cemeteries Because I don't know what I might bring home. I always thought that it was just for fun, because they lived in South America, and it was just tales they grew up with. After my grandmother's funeral, I had a horrible nightmare that I hadn't told anyone the severity of, even till this day. It was so frightening that I woke up and it felt like my bed was shaking because my heart was beating so quickly. After that experience, strange things started to happen. I would wake up and my Bible would be on the floor. I slept with it away from my bed, open to the 23rd palm. Later on, I would feel my bed sink, as if someone was sitting on it. And another time I saw a shadow standing on the inside of my room. I was terrified, but didn't want to see anything to upset my family, so I would just sleep with the lights on. Another time I was vacuuming for my mom, and something ran up right beside my face, so I dropped the vacuum and just walked away. This was all happening in a short span of time, 2 to 3 weeks, so I just thought it was the stress of my grandmother's death. However, something changed my mind. I was lying on the couch in the living room on my stomach, and my little 6-year-old nephew was sitting on my back. From my family room, and where the couch was positioned, you could see the door of my mother's bedroom. So as we were sitting there watching TV, he asked me, "Auntie Rose, did you see that person come out of Grandma's room?" I completely freaked out internally, but I didn't want to scare my nephew, so I told him it was probably nothing. No one was home with us, so we both stayed in the far end of the living room until someone came home. Later, as my family discussed it, I found out that myself, my sister-in-law, and my nephew all had encounters with whatever was in that home. Eventually, whatever it was went away, and I had an amazing dream about my grandmother a few nights later. In the dream, she was saying something very important, and I was listening intently. When I awoke, however, I couldn't remember what she had told me. Later that afternoon, I found out that my aunt, my grandmother's daughter, my uncle, her son, and myself all had a similar dream where we couldn't remember what she was saying. My grandmother's cousin told me that perhaps she'll have me remember when I need it most. That was the most comforting thought of all. Pine Hollow is on RT 106 on Long Island in Nassau County. The history goes back to the 1880s, and there are 7 Civil War veterans buried there. The extraordinary thing is, they were all volunteer African American. This is an African American cemetery. I went there 4 or 5 times. The first I went by it and never found it. The next time, I found it with my son. We mistook a huge hill of around a mile and very hard climbing. We were about a quarter of a mile away, but no good. I got in my car and said I'd go a little further north, then go home. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the sign in my mirror. Just sheer coincidence that I saw it. We went in, and my son was talking to the dead, telling them we come in peace and will not disturb them. I took photos and got a minor flying object when nothing was there. It looks like a flower, but floating midair. I was fascinated by 2 unmarked graves of Civil War vets, along with the other 5, but these 2 were unmarked. Just a GER star to show, and a very badly worn star at that. I also found a white large glowing glob at around 6 feet off the ground, with a movement tail on it. The second time I went alone to see more of the CW vetstones. As I entered, I got the feeling of being watched, and the strange tingling I get when anything happens. I turned to go to the old station where the vets were. I got 6 feet from the turn, and the feeling got worse. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a black figure from the neck down, wearing a black cape and a jacket. I am a Civil War history buff, so I knew the jacket and cape to be a great coat from the Civil War. I was startled, and when I looked back, it was gone. So I took 3 more steps, and again the feeling, and turned around again. And he was there, the same figure, and this time, gone before my eyes. I met the volunteer groundskeeper and we spoke. He told me a lot of the history, and I enjoyed it a lot. While talking, I saw a black cat suddenly appear in the middle of a field near the haunted hill, and it sat watching me. So I took a photo in a second. As I was taking the second, it started walking, and again it was gone. It could not hide. It was just gone. The next visit was with my son again, and we had a good time. During the time, he said the same thing he said before in the graveyard. Why do you have such good stuff happen like the photos? I told him the same thing I did before. Keep your mind open. On every visit we talked to the dead, and this time I did as the keeper told me to put a rock, like Jewish people do, on the stone to show you had visited. He did on David's stone, and as he did, we started to walk out, him leading the way. He was ahead, and I looked away, and he said, "Wow, did you see that?" I said no, and asked what. He told me that he saw a same black round object fly over Mr. Carl's grave and disappear in the direction I was looking. There were no birds or insects flying, nothing, just a lousy day. The last time I went, I took photos and have been trying to figure out who these 2 soldiers were. I asked them for a sign or let me know who you are so we can show true respect, but nothing, so I went to leave. After taking a lot of photos, I went out to take a photo of the arch you enter under, and then a second further back. My intention was to leave then, but as I looked, it started raining leaves. There was no wind. The trees were dead still. The leaves came down straight like confetti. As I walked back inside, it stopped. The leaves were around 20 feet from the nearest branch of a tree, and it was still no wind to even blow them. I said a thanks and a few prayers, and again went to leave. Again, the leaves began to fall, and again, no wind either at the ground level or in any of the trees. I felt compelled to go back in, and said thanks again, and a few more prayers. As I went to leave, I didn't look towards the entrance. I just drove off. It felt like a gesture of thanks for the time I spent looking in the archive for these soldiers. Funny how abruptly it started and stopped, and 2 times the same place I was when it started. I am still looking for info on these volunteers who fought in our Civil War, but it's so hard, and I'll wait for a long time. It is what I said I would do, and when I find the info, I will have it put near the stones. I am now on a mission thanks to a book story and the volunteer soldier Mr. David. Someday I will go back and say hello. I hope I have more info for them. Many say that this is a very haunted place, but I've never felt fear or unrest here. It is restful and nice, and if I should meet the Phantom again, I hope he helps me with the unknown's identity. These heroes should be recognized for the work they did, and not by the draft. Oh, David was shot in the left lung in the CW, and survived to live a good life. His family still lives a few hundred yards down the road on a hill, bearing his name. What a tribute. What a guy. In most of the stories on the site, people are afraid, and I do not understand why. I have lived with a ghost since I was 4 years old, and Henry has never done anything to frighten us. When my family moved into a house, they found a print of an old portrait in the attic. Liking it, they brought it down into the home. My younger sister Tina, aged 3, and I were at first disturbed by Henry. The eyes seemed to follow you. The picture and the ghost so dubbed, because the only part of the artist's signature legible was Henry. We told our parents that Henry was a ghost. In an attempt to ease our fears, our parents said yes, Henry was a ghost, but a friendly one. In fact, Henry liked little girls and protected them. What my parents did not realize was that Tina and I had begun talking to him. I suppose they believed him to be an imaginary friend later on. I only have a fleeting memory of ever seeing him. I do remember pulling up a chair in front of the picture on the wall, and I ended up talking to him. I never remember hearing an answer out loud, only in my head. We lived in the house until I was 15. While we lived there, things would happen. Not anything bad, just mischievous. You put an item down on the table, turn around, find it on the living room couch. Things would occasionally fall off the shelves when no one was near them. One shoe would end up in another room entirely. These things were either ignored or blamed on the fact that 7 children and 2 adults in one house frequently equals chaos. I knew differently Henry was doing it. Sometimes, I would see his face in the mirror laughing at his pranks. Tina eventually stopped believing in Henry, although not completely, as an incident later in life would prove. It seems none of my additional siblings ever saw or told us of an encounter with Henry. When we moved, Henry moved with us. He was part of the family. My parents eventually moved to a smaller place and asked me if I wanted Henry. I was putting the picture in the car when my husband told Tina we were taking him. This started a fight. Both Tina and I wanted Henry. Tina threatened to damage Henry if I did not let go. I let her have him. My sister had 3 children at the time. None of them knew the story of Henry or had been told anything about a ghost. Tina couldn't hang the picture. All of her children were frightened of it. After letting Henry sit covered in a closet with his face to the wall for a year, she relented. David and I were asked did we want Henry. Yes, we took him to our home, and my son was not afraid of Henry at all. The same little pranks occurred in our home once we had Henry. My husband hated Henry. We were married at my parents' home, in front of the fireplace. Henry hung above that fireplace. David swore that during the ceremony in July, his butt was being warmed by a large fire behind him. Always said that was Henry's way of telling him to be a good husband. Shortly after we moved to the home I am now in, my husband tragically passed away. In an attempt to keep the house with one less income, I rented out a bedroom. I did not tell my first or any other tenants up front about Henry. I figured he would let them know in time, or not at all. For some reason, Henry completely ignored some people and bugged others to distraction. When Henry hid Carolina's box of wires for 3 days, I told her about the ghost. I swear we looked everywhere, took apart other boxes to see if they had been mixed in. 3 days later, I go down to the basement. Sitting in the middle of the floor is her box, a place, mind you, that had been searched at least twice. Things that go missing and reappear are never things that are vital. Not your house keys when you are late for work, or your medication. Just things that drive you nuts until you decide to buy another one. Of course, when you get home, the original's sitting on your bed. One tenant had been having visits from Henry for a while. He never said anything, because Rosita was not sure if I was aware of Henry. Apparently, Henry was moving papers from his desk, putting them under his mattress, taking taking other items and putting them into a box. One day he actually saw Henry in his room glaring at him. I still think that was Henry's way of telling Rosita that despite the fact we were the only humans in this home, this was Henry's place and he would protect it. Rosita was the first man in the house, and after my husband's death, maybe my parents were right. Henry does protect little girls, even when they grow up. The only time Henry's antics caused a problem was when a friend's child lost a toy. The boy had many trains. After a visit at my home, one was missing. The parents looked at their place. I looked here again, and again. Nothing. About 2 days later, a thought pops into my mind out of nowhere. Look under the cushions of the blue chair. I do, and there's Aiden's train. I know very well I looked repeatedly in that area as Aiden was playing there. Henry has only once done something in front of me. I was sitting on my bed with the cat. The bedroom door, which was ajar, opens fully. I turned to the cat and said, "How did you even do that from here?" We were the only ones in the house. I put the door back to its original position and opens a little more on its own. Usually, Henry's style is wait until you leave the room and then move something. I've always wondered, where do the objects go when I can't find them? Perhaps I've lived with Henry for so long, and we met when I was very young, that I cannot understand being afraid. To me, Henry is family, so he doesn't have our breakfast at the table. He still is family. I realized early on, I was aware of things others were not.
I met my first ghost when I was 4 years old, in the bathroom of the first house I can clearly remember living in, and ever since then, I've been chased by them. The first ghost was a young boy in overalls and a button-down shirt and a straw hat. He looked to be about 6 years old, and didn't do anything except stand there in the bathroom watching as I brushed my teeth. He appeared there several times over the next few months, until my family moved to a house just up the road. In the new house, which was the same property, I never felt comfortable. Sometimes at night, I woke up hearing someone call my name, but the voice was unfamiliar. I was always too afraid to get out of bed, and assumed that if it was my mother or father calling me, they would come to get me. The house was always cold, as I'm told newly built houses usually are for a while, but even years after we moved in, there was always a chill in the air that neither the electric heat nor the wood-burning stove could chase away, even in the summer. The first time anything appeared to me in that house, I was 7, and my brother Josh was a few months old. His crib was kept in my room, and I was always the first to wake up when he was crying. One night, in March, when Josh was 5 months old, he was crying, and he woke me. I sat up in bed and waited for Mom to come in and get him, and as I looked out my bedroom window, I saw something silvery and translucent, standing on the railing of the deck, on the back of the house. As my eyes came into focus, I made out the vague figure of a heavy-set woman with a little boy in her arms. The same little boy who had appeared to me in the bathroom of the old house 3 years before. She extended her arms and held them, dangling from her hands, and then let them go. I quickly closed my eyes, not wanting to see what happened. I heard the sound of a child crying. I covered my hand with my pillow and tried to go back to sleep. Through the rest of my childhood, there were many more experiences of this type. I saw a male ghost that I presumed to be the father of the little boy ghost, a much younger little girl ghost, and an older girl who had a distressed look about her, as if she had been through something terrible. Her clothes were ragged and torn up, and appeared to be stained with something dark. I speculated that it might have been blood, and every year, on the night of August 1st, I lie awake at night, listening to the sounds of children screaming. I gave up trying to explain the sights and sounds to my parents, who just laughed at me. Their excuses for not believing me went from inadequate to just ridiculous. At one point, when I was 11 or 12 years old, they told me ghosts don't haunt new houses because they can't make enough noise. All that changed when I was 15. My mom and I were up late watching a movie after she had come in from work. Around 2 a.m., she drifted off to sleep, and I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. When I came back, she was sitting bolt upright on the couch where she had been lying asleep. Her eyes were wide and fearful, and she was pointing at the front window. I followed her gaze, and in the light on the front porch, I saw the shadow of a man hanging from a rope. Together, Mom and I opened the front door to investigate, but nothing was there. Mom was proactive. She began researching the farm we lived on, desperate to find any reason for the hauntings we were experiencing. In the meantime, I experienced more and more alarming sightings. I found old toys under my bed, ragdolls with button eyes that were pulled loose, and wooden pop guns and handmade bears, all of them dirty and obviously ancient. The two small children kept appearing wherever I was, calling my name and tugging on my clothes. The most frightening thing happened a few weeks before I left for college. I was packing up my books and CDs and felt an unwelcome chill. It was early August again, about the same time I always had the most intense experiences. I stood up and moved the box I was packing, and when I turned around, I saw a large man in the corner of my room. He was different from any of the other ghosts I had seen, with a darker coloring and sharper, more defined details. He was wearing dark clothes and had his back turned towards me. I looked closely and saw that there was someone with him, someone he backed into the corner, the older girl from the family ghost I'd been seeing for years. He was harming her, though I couldn't tell if he was just beating her or trying to mess with her or what. But she was crying and screaming, and it was absolutely bone-chilling. As I stood there in the room watching, the other male ghost came into the room holding an axe and approached the other two in the corner. I couldn't watch and ran out of the room. Over the next few years, my mother documented everything she had seen and heard in this house, ranging from the same sorts of things I had seen to some even more aggressive appearances. One day in early August, a couple of years after I left for college, she was in the barn watering the horses and tripped over an axe. Later that same year, she was cleaning out the basement and came across a rope that none of our family had put there. Her research on the farm and the original house that stood on the land revealed that it had once belonged to a wealthy family named Hawkins. The father, Thomas, was convicted in 1893 of the murder of a young man named James Logan after discovering him in his daughter Francine's bedroom. Thomas was put to sleep later that year. His wife Josephine and their two young children were killed during a tornado in March of the next year, and the property was sold at an auction the following August, a year after the murder of James Logan. I've seen and heard ghosts for many years, ever since I was a small child. These are a series of ghost stories that you probably haven't heard. Forgive me, the formatting is a little different, and it's scattered, and the writing isn't very good, but I think you'll get the gist of it. This one occurred in Elong Road, Croydon, Surrey. That's England. My mother saw and heard a little boy walking up the road and singing. He then walked up a pile of sand and disappeared through a wall in a different city in Surrey. I saw 2 ghosts there, next to the chalk pits. The first appeared and disappeared and was an old man in brown. The second was younger, and he appeared and disappeared twice before my eyes. 2 people walking towards me walked right through him and didn't see him at all. It was very eerie. My sister and I saw the apparition of a man in dark clothes and wearing a hat, standing in our bedroom. The room was cold and eerie. We were both very frightened. Several months later, my sister saw a girl with a Scotty dog come in the front door and walk up the stairs. There was nobody there when she went to investigate. In this next small tale, this event occurred in Eversfield's old people's home. It's in Surrey. In the caretaker's house, and in the house next door, there were noises heard when nobody was around. Blood dripping through the ceiling onto mirrors, which could never be cleaned. They also heard the sounds of coat hangers being rattled about next door when nobody was in the house. Doors would open and shut violently. A bed moved away from the wall, silently, while the room was full of people. You could also hear the sounds of women's voices downstairs, of laughter and chatter. When you open the door to listen, it then goes silent. The lights swing violently as though there is a strong wind, but there is no wind to be seen, or felt for that matter. At the Reigate Parish School, now converted into houses and flats, the sounds of children playing and talking can be heard. I don't mean the voices of the children while they're still in school. By the time they leave, after hours, you could hear the voices of children still ringing. People have also reported piano playing as well as a tambourine. When they go to open the door, the playing stops, but the piano is reverberating. On the road of Wallfield Annex, Reigate Road, there's an extremely haunted house now, also converted to flats. The ghost of a man in period costume stands at the window on a full moon. I've had the privilege of staying the night at these flats before, and let me tell you, the ghost is a real thing. He's aware that you are watching him, and each night he gets closer to your bed. One night, he was peering into my face, and he winked at me before disappearing. Apparently, the house was owned by an artist who liked to paint by the light of the moon, which may explain the haunting. There were times where my daughter had certain experiences as well. My daughter told me that she had a friend, a child, who visited her at night and stood at the end of the bed. Obviously, she's referring to a ghost. This house is a Gregorian mansion, and you can feel its history. It's a very spiritual house. I often dream of this house. Perhaps my spirit is there, even in life. Anyway, that's all my stories that I have to share. I work really early in the morning, so by the time I get off work and head home, I'm really tired. I was sneaking in a nap before my husband came home. I've seen some unexplained things when I was younger, but I've never had this happen to me. This was in my parents' basement because at that time, my husband and I were building a home. When I think about it, the dogs never came down in the room. They hated it down there. Anyways, like I said, I was taking a nap. I remember waking up in complete horror. I was being attacked. By this I mean, this shadow figure was trying to get at me while I was asleep. It started at the foot of my bed, and I was kicking my feet at it to get away from me. It then moved up right next to me. I could feel it trying to touch me, and that horrified me. Something about this thing was not right. I was still kicking my legs at it. I remember thinking in my head, no, no. I then sat up straight in bed and looked around. Nothing was there. My heart was pounding and I was sweating. I didn't know what to think. I still don't. I wasn't fully awake during this fight to keep the shadow away from me. I guess I could have been dreaming, but it felt so real. Living with a ghost is not all that bad, as my family and I have found out. We moved to our home in the Skyline Estates in 1991. At the time, we had our 3 and 1-year-old boys living at home. We started to get clues that something unruly was living with us when my wife and I started to hear our 3-year-old talking to someone in his bedroom. He told us that it was an older lady that came to talk to him. He stayed in that room for 3 years until he moved him to another room and put his younger brother in that room. The same thing started happening with the other brother. We have 2 younger kids who also stayed in that room once, and they all reported that an old lady had visited them. Oftentimes, the lady would speak through them. The kids would call her Miss G. Miss G would also make herself known to my wife and I. She was very active any time we made improvements to our home. She would come and watch us, often from the closet, as we would consistently hear and see the closet door open. One time, my wife even swore that she saw a floating face there as she was cleaning. When we were working on the house, we would also feel as though a hand was placed on our bodies. At this moment, we'd also feel a draft of cold come in. When I was working alone, I'd feel the hand again, thinking that this time it was my wife. I would stop to say something, look over my shoulder, and there would be nobody there. This happens to my wife too. She would think I was touching her as well. I saw Miss G once in 1993. I was sitting in the living room late at night. I remember I had the doors leading to the living room closed. A short moment later, I heard what I thought was the sound of my wife walking behind the door. I turned to look back and saw the silhouette of a figure walk by. I immediately went to open the door and look for my wife when I saw a figure move quickly from the hallway into the kitchen, then turn the corner. It happened so fast, and it spooked me. That's when my wife walked through the front door. She had been shopping. That's when I suddenly realized that this was the presence of Miss G that was making herself known to me. Even though it spooked me, I don't think she meant any harm by it. As if to say, sorry, I'm just passing through here. My wife has had many interactions with her in the kitchen while cooking. She would set the table and ask her to move a plate. The plate would move slightly forward on its own. Not a big movement, but enough to let her know she was there. After these encounters, we did some research about who our ghostly ghost really was. We found out that an older lady had the house built as her dream home to retire in. Unfortunately, she passed away only a day after she moved in. There was another homeowner who bought the house before us. They only lived there for a month before moving out to live with their kids. I really don't think Miss G is a threat to us, but I believe when we do eventually move from this house, we'll miss her presence, even if it's a bit scary at times. My name is Stacy, and I reside in Brownsville, Texas, approximately 2 minutes from the international bridge into Mexico. What I'm about to tell you is something that happened to me when I was in the 3rd grade, and haven't been able to forget since then. I'm now 25. I remember very distinctly that it was Halloween night, and my brother, father, and I had just returned from a night of trick-or-treating. It was almost midnight when my parents sent us to bed, worried we wouldn't wake up in time for school the next day. At this time, being so young and so close to the border, I shared a room with my nanny. We slept on 2 twin beds. Mine was situated right under a window to my left, and my feet pointed towards an adjoining room we called the laundry room that also doubled as a closet. There was a window in there as well, which illuminated the little room with light from the moon in conjunction with the street lamps. At this time, our house didn't have central air, so we slept with the windows open and a floor oscillating fan. I'd been asleep for a while, and I woke up because I felt hot and looked at the fan as the blades had a tendency to jam. As I had suspected, the fan wasn't working, and I stared at the ceiling, contemplating going to the kitchen for a glass of water. While doing so, I happened to glance into the closet, and standing in front of the washer was the figure of a man dressed all in black and wearing some type of hat, a fedora maybe. Also, his face was not visible to me at all, and all I could see was the black underneath his hat. He was chuckling, but at the same time, I thought it was the most horrifying noise in the world. He started to talk, very casually, about how he was going to get me and my family. I snapped, and finally I realized that this wasn't supposed to be happening. He wasn't supposed to be there. Where was his face? I jumped up from the bed and sprinted to the door, hoping at the same time, not wanting anything to be able to reach out and grab me. I could still hear him laughing, and I felt him getting closer. By the way, when he said all those things to me, it was like a telepathic thing. I don't know if you understand that, but that's the best way I can describe it. I then noticed a faint banging that kept getting louder as I got closer to the door. I then realized it was my brother banging on his wall. That was when I realized that I was screaming at the top of my lungs. I reached the door, and no matter how hard I pulled on it, it wouldn't open. I also tried turning on the lights. I had a dimmer, and I kept turning the knob, but it wouldn't turn on. Suddenly, my nanny woke up and yelled at me to stop screaming and asking me what was wrong. Was I crazy? Then, just as suddenly as it had began, the laughing and the whispering and everything else stopped. The door opened and the light turned on. My parents had no idea what was going on because their room was at the other side of the house. My nanny still tells me that I was white as a ghost, and as soon as she touched me, I fainted. Needless to say, I was not able to go to school the next day. When I was about 7 years old, I can remember this very strange house in West Virginia I used to live in. First, it started with my brothers and sisters and I. We all had one bedroom upstairs we slept in, and one night, waking up, I saw a strange figure of a little child by our bed. I recall turning the opposite way and holding on to my older sister. Being that age, I never thought nothing of it until about 8 years later my family and I moved out, and we were talking about how nice it was to live there, and my mother and father were telling us if we only knew the strange things that they had seen and heard. My father said he woke up one night seeing a little child and thinking it was one of us, and he said go back to bed. The figure never moved. So we sat up from the bed realizing it was a shadow figure, and not one of us. And when we went to wake my mother up, it was gone. And other times, here my mother would get up in the middle of the night and see that figure all the time, thinking it was okay, nothing bad was really happening. A few months after that, he heard loud noises, like a baby crying. He said it sounded like it was coming from the wall. My father would really have loved to know about the spirits, but my mother really wanted to move. It's funny when you are little, you really don't know what's going on. When I was little, I used to play outside a lot. In my country, the weather is really hot. So hot that if you stay under the sun for 5 minutes and then go back inside, your head hurts and you will see lights everywhere, for a while anyway. I always used to see figures that those lights would make, but I wasn't scared at all because I knew that the sun was making them. One day, I was outside playing with my brother, but it wasn't as hot to make your head hurt or see figures and lights. I saw a shape of a black dog walking or going somewhere, and then it disappeared. Well, the dog wasn't walking, he was just going somewhere. The figure was not perfectly clear to say that it was definitely a dog, but it really looked like one, and once I saw it, I didn't say anything because I was used to seeing things because of the strong sun. But as soon as I saw it, it disappeared. My brother said, "Hey, did you see that figure of that black dog that went by and disappeared?" I was shocked because I thought I was the only one that saw that thing. It was crazy. So that was a very strange experience. We both asked each other what the heck that was. We were very confused. I'm sure that the figure we saw was a ghost. Hey guys, so before you click off, I encourage you to watch to the end of this video, to the end of this outro, because it really makes a difference in my channel. If you could do me a really quick favor, could you watch until the very end of this video and just share this video, leave it a like because it's really important for the algorithm to recommend me in the YouTube section. Otherwise, if you guys are clicking off too soon, I won't be able to get recommended and that will kind of screw up the algorithm for me. Secondly, I'd love to hear your comments on the video, so in the comment section below, let me know which stories you like the most, which ones that you enjoy,